We're going to go back to James and pick up where we left off a couple of weeks ago. In verse 13 and 14 of chapter 1, let me read these verses for you. James says, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire." So James is completely shifting gears now. We've talked about bearing up through trials and enduring, keeping going. We've talked about faith, the importance of not wavering. Now James shifts his attention to temptation. Now there are different kinds of trials, aren't there? Sometimes God tests our faith, and sometimes we are tempted to sin. And we often have a tendency to lump those two events in together. Well, sometimes God just wants me to have more faith, and sometimes God just wants to make sure that I'm strong against sin, and so he allows these temptations, or he causes these temptations. And James wants to make it very clear here that God does not tempt us with evil. Does God allow us to be tested? Does God use the things in our lives to test our faith and to strengthen us? Yes, absolutely he does, but he never tempts us to sin. This is something that's incredibly important for us to realize, because we have a tendency as human beings to rationalize. When we are tempted, or when we fall prey to temptation, when we do sin, we have a tendency to blame shift. Adam did that the very first time that sin entered into the world. He said, "The woman made me do it." And we have a tendency to do that. And sometimes we blame God. Solomon says, I think it's Proverbs 18 or 19, talks about raging against God when we fall prey to sin. We have a tendency to blame it even on God. God, how could you let this happen to me? Why did you put this in front of me? And why did I have to sin? And the fact is, of course, that we don't have to sin. What James wants us to understand is that God never tempts us, but we are tempted and we fall to sin because of our own lust and our own sinful, innate desires. Verse 14, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Now, does Satan help that along? Does he encourage us? Do his demons, his minions, have a way of laying things in front of us so that they look very attractive? Of course. But here's the reality, my friends. We would sin without any help because we are sinners. We have inherited the sin nature because of the sin of Adam. Romans chapter 5 delineates that very, very clearly. And we sin because we choose to sin. If I could ask you to just remember one thing from our time together here today, of all the things that I have said and will say, sin is always a choice. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul makes it very clear that there is always a way of escape. God always provides for us, even in our temptation, that we may make another choice. When I sin, when you sin, it is because we choose to do so. Can I challenge you today to examine your own heart, and I will do the same with mine, when I am tempted, to look for that way of escape, to understand that I am making a choice here, and to not rationalize my sin, but rather to cry out to God for the help that he always gives. Father, help me to make another choice. That needs to be our prayer when we are tempted. Not, Father, why did you let this happen? Or why are you causing me to go down this path? God does not tempt us, my friends. He always makes a way of escape.